Some of you may know that I've been going around the country, or at least in the south of England at the moment, and visiting places and giving some talks. I'm really only at the beginning of this sort of phase of what I want to do with the channel, and that is, of course, go out and actually meet you. And I've mentioned that in the past, and I've had some amazing response from those people who've turned up to see me and wanted to meet me and shake my hands and all of those sort of things, and listen to what I've said. And not everybody agrees, and that's absolutely perfectly valid and good, because what kind of society would it be if we just all nodded and agreed with one another? Now, the interesting thing is that when I go to these meetings of people who I would class as awake, those that know what's going on, those that know the nice, kind, benevolent government who's been trying out all these sort of dictatorial things of 15-minute cities and digital IDs, and trying to persuade us that we need a central bank digital currency, that cash is no good, putting the surveillance all over us, particularly in the public sphere and in supermarkets now, as I've mentioned many times in my monologues here. But when I go and see these enlightened and awoken people who meet at these groups, I look around and I see reflected back at me myself. Now, I wonder if I should be surprised at that. And when I say reflected back at me myself, I mean my demographic. What I mean by that, of course, is my age group. So I see and I look I see that there are people in their 50s, 60s, and maybe those in their 70s. Young, sprightly people, as I'm sure you'll appreciate. But what I tend not to see, and this is what really concerns me, is the next generation. Those people who perhaps would come in the bracket of my children. My children now are in their late 20s and early 30s. And they're the children that have been brought up in a completely digital world. I've got one foot in the old analogue world. I remember typewriters, reel-to-reel tape recorders, record players, telephone boxes that you put money in, all of that sort of thing. And of course, I've got one foot in the digital world, which, as I've mentioned before, makes making these videos a lot easier than having to buy a roll of film and develop it and then trying to get people to come, say, to a small private cinema so I could play them a video, or rather a film, of what I want to talk about. Probably easier just to actually stand in the street and talk. So digital stuff has made this kind of thing very easy. And for my children in their late 20s and 30s and all that generation, and of course my children's children, i.e. my grandchildren, that is a world that's all they know. They don't know really, they have no experience of living through the analogue world. Now, I often say that we don't want to throw away the baby with the bathwater from the past, meaning that there was a lot of good things in the past that, for the sake of progression, that we are effectively, it seems to me, throwing away. And some of those might be things like good schooling or good policing, a policy about protecting our borders from over migration, things like that. In the past, we had ethics and morals. We had a certain amount of decency. We had a lot of respect and things like that. Now, we also had wonderful architecture. When you look around at the moment, you start to see a lot of the bland coming in, a lot of the not quite as good as it used to be sort of thing coming in. And of course, from the government, we have a lot of surveillance and diktats and tyranny coming in and telling us what we are going to have, rather than us actually asking for it. So we come from this older world which had meaning and significance, and we had, to a certain degree, an element of control. It seems now the foot is on the other hand, that the authority figures seem that they think they have all of the control, and the younger people, the ones that I'm talking about there, where my children and my children's children, don't really understand the sense of freedom and the amount of freedom that we had in the past. And so I wonder what's happened to the youth, to the young. Are they awake? Do they not want to get involved in these conversations that are going on? The initiatives to move away from highly processed food, to growing your own food, to eating organically, to moving away from pharmaceutical products, which may have a whole list of side effects that may not be beneficial, to stand up on their own rights, to understand that they have sovereignty, that they don't need to behave as children, that they are indeed in their late 20s and 30s. They are actually grown-ups. They don't need to ask for their rights. They can just be and have those rights without having to assert them because they're there, they are theirs already. And when I go to these meetings and these talks and these events, I don't see them, and I wonder, where are they? Are they still in their bubble, fixed with their telephones and their wearables and their computers? And are they very much in the bubble, in the matrix? Do they even know that there is a outside of the matrix? Do they even think that there is a benefit to not being in the matrix? Maybe they just look at us older people who are, of course, maturer and have been around a bit and in theory have wisdom. Do they look at us as if we're just crackpots, conspiracy theorists, nutcases, like perhaps many of the councillors do, it seems to me, having spoken to some of them, or other members of society who think, actually, Richard, you're a bit of a loony. What you're saying is preposterous. Of course, the world is not like that. What has happened to our youth? Particularly, of course, the very next generation, those in their 10s, 12s, 13s, those who are going through the school process now and being sexualized and being conditioned, brainwashed, you might say, to be obedient servants of the state. What are we going to do about those? These are questions that I don't necessarily have the answers to, but it's worth us thinking about it and trying to solve that problem. You can't just unplug the young from their dependency of their mobile phones, their bell ringers, that, you know, the doorbell things that do the recording, the thing in the corner of the room that's listening to you and occasionally, if you ask it, will play music, the phones that are taking the biometrics and have a microphone in there that they too are collecting data about you, or the fact that every website they ever visit, if they're not using a VPN, of course, is taking more data about them, or they're putting stuff on social media that is also capturing all that information about how they live, where they live, and what kind of lifestyle they're having, and knows pretty much everything about them. What do we do about those young people? We can't, as I say, can't unplug them from that. But maybe there are methods, and I'm going to be exploring more of those in future videos, in which I'll perhaps be appealing to the games makers and the software developers to start trying to find a nuance that will, whilst they won't give these things up, that they might be able to be much more engaged in who they are, where they are, and potentially where they are going. Because it's important that although we, the older people, are pushing back and setting up these initiatives and digging our own food and all of that, it is important that the next generation also come on board and join us and not think that we're just a bunch of old crackpots.